Thank you for joining us for our presentation tonight. The Landscape of Homeopathy, Terry Cotter, President of Biomed Internatica. He's going to speak further about homeopathic landscape in 2016. Terry.
That's great, Heather. We thought it would be beneficial to kind of give an update to all the activity that's been going on. Of course, we're dealing with two issues. One is homeopathy and the shocking situation we found ourselves in for the SANUM product line in the United States. That started back in 2013. And then, of course, regulatory changes in Canada that also seem to coincidentally all be occurring at the same time. And many of the products in the SANUM line had been registered by then, but many also had not. And the ones that we're talking about that weren't were largely the microbiological remedies, things that were mineral and supplements, those types of things, herbal formulations that already have pre-existing monographs. They weren't a problem. But basically, the Canadian system is structured in such a way that if you cannot find a mother ingredient in a monograph and an international pharmacopoeia, then you're stuck in the water unless you can produce a study or establish that monograph, and that seems to take quite a bit of time. I'm going to talk about the SANUM history in the United States. That's the most common question I get. Bring you up to speed on what had happened and where we're at. And then I'll move into what I had witnessed at the homeopathy drug reviews that took place in Washington, and saw some excellent presentations there. And from some of the most distinguished doctors I've had the pleasure to meet and their associations, many there representing thousands of doctors across the country, MDs, NDs, DCs, lots of integrated people that were represented there. And so they weren't given a lot of time to prepare, but I thought what they did deliver there was excellent, and it was like attending a two-day symposium, really. I've taken all of the hearing materials, which became a public domain when the submissions were presented. They're all available on the FDA website, but for your convenience, I've had Keith assemble them all in a downloadable file folder, so you can access them all in PDF format now, and you can read them or print them or do whatever you like. But all of the things I'll be talking about here are excerpts from that stack of documents. And what I'm doing really is talking about the things that stood out for me most throughout those 2 days of events. But let's start with the SANUM story. So many users across North America were our customers connected to the SANUM Kelbeck product line, the Biological Medicine Foundation. And it's been available throughout North America for about 30 years, in Canada for probably 12, but people have been buying from the United States. And then we came up to a surprise in about 2013. So this all began when FDA sent a GMP, this is Good Manufacturing Practices. They sent an audit team on a tour of small manufacturers in Europe. We haven't really heard why that happened, but in any event, they scheduled themselves to arrive at the SANUM Hoya factory, and there 2 people conducted an intensive 7-day inspection of the facility. Any inspection that takes place at a facility like this is going to have a number of housekeeping adjustments. Fortunately, there was nothing major reported, and in fact, the anecdotal comments I got afterward were that, in fact, the inspectors were quite impressed with the standards the Germans were sustaining for all these years, continuing to invest in new technology and continuously upgrading. So a schedule of those housekeeping adjustments was sent. This is not uncommon. Many companies do this, and they haven't agreed. Nothing was mortal in the list. So a schedule was established, and they would provide an update as each housekeeping item was completed. Everything went along fine until August 2013, when the first shipment was detained at the Seattle airport. We hadn't received any notice at Terra Medica, and SANUM also had not been told that there would be a problem forthcoming soon. So we had quite a large order that sat there in customs brokerage at the airport as we waited and tried to find out what on earth was wrong. Eventually, after not getting much response or information, we ended up sending that shipment back to Germany because storage was getting so expensive. At that point, SANUM then, in alarm, of course, expedited the housekeeping orders that they were given, and then they forwarded a complete package to the FDA that acknowledging everything was complete by September of 2013. but they didn't get any response. So we were being told that the all clear still had not been issued, so we couldn't order stock. And SANUM was unable to obtain further direction. Is there still a problem, or what's going on? In February of 2014, the FDA made this assertion of a theoretical risk of antibiotic contamination in some few products. This is 7 months later, when so sales had been proceeding as normal and had been actually for the previous 30 years, but suddenly there's this theoretical risk that appeared. And indeed, some of the products are produced from a microbiological material. It's a penicillium family of fungus. They're not grown in a manner which you would utilize to harvest antibiotic substances. And in fact, the proprietary process is designed to prevent the appearance of those molecules. Washing, in fact, occurs of the cells that are harvested from the vats to assure that, again, the antibiotic materials aren't present. And this process has been a proprietary, scientifically validated exercise patented by the company and well known by the German authority, who does local oversight for GMP standards. Okay, this is going to turn, there we go. So SANUM actually contacted FDA, and what they want to do is provide evidence that the antibiotic risk doesn't exist. And in March 2014, FDA finally just refused flatly to hear the science presentation in a telephone call. The penicillium word is right there on the box, so the mental leap goes that, hey, there must be a risk of antibiotic. Look right there. And it was quite astounding, actually. Then soon thereafter, FDA required that we conduct a voluntary recall, and in our advice from legal counsel, basically people said, well, you know what, you have a solid science case here. You should just go along and do what they're asking you to do, and then later we'll make a proper presentation to the appropriate people. But then after we agreed to do the recall, FDA required that we issue a press release. Now, we only sell the products to doctors, so our argument was, well, the doctors know who they've been transacting with. Well, in the broader interest, FDA felt it just public responsibility to let everybody know. So we finally wrote a document that said there have been no reports of any reactions to these products, never an indication or a test that ever showed a positive contamination. And off the press release went to the FDA for them to administer how they would, and they ended up sending it to every health authority around the world. Well, immediately corporate media saw that press release and started writing all kinds of flippant, satirical, categorical articles about contaminated homeopathics, herbal supplements, natural remedies generally. And it wasn't just about us. They were talking about other incidents that were occurring in and around that time as well. But it just seemed like a flurry of a campaign had started. Countries around the world who were receiving this press release started calling the German GMP authority, asking what on earth is going on. We have those products here in our country. What should we be doing? And the German authority hadn't even been notified. FDA hadn't even contacted the authority there about what they were proposing was a public safety risk. And for us to reflect, we just don't understand public safety and international protocol in such matters. You would have thought the first phone call would go to the local authorities so they could deal with any real risk that might have existed. So later, the German authority, in their confusion and trying to quell the inquiries, they decided to conduct a new inspection of the factory in August of 2014 to resolve the debate once and for all, and certainly to put themselves to comfort. And then they asserted that the SANUM products remain GMP compliant and there really is no public safety risk that they're aware of. So they put that in a letter of all clear and sent that off to FDA by November of 2014. And there's been no response, or there was no response at that time, certainly, and that was, again, another mystery. Why don't they even acknowledge the letter? And then, in the newspapers, I'm sure you've seen, in January 2015, the New York Attorney General decided to hold a press conference about a sting operation they were conducting, and where they supposed that they had done DNA testing on herbal supplements and found that all the wrong plants were apparently in these, or not the correct plants at all. In fact, somebody in one of the corporate media articles started making a funny statement about house plants being in these things. Anyway, it wasn't long thereafter, of course, when the people who were at the end of the finger pointing said, hold on, you said you'd use DNA testing. You can't use DNA testing for our products. It simply doesn't apply here. So subsequently, the correct information was provided to the authority, and I don't recall seeing anything in the media I was watching about a public apology or that was reparation. You can just imagine the market damage that was done in that incident. But what I did hear thereafter, though, was another issuance from that department basically saying, well, we may have lost this time, but we're going to chase down those risky herbal products once and for all. And just astounding, the attitude that this is something that needs to be chased. But anyway, it just spoke to me about the environment and what on earth is going on in the background, if anything. I mean, it's just very difficult to understand. But overall, of course, it was just more bad media for complementary and alternative medicine generally. In March 2015, the FDA announced that they plan to review their policy for homeopathic drugs, the entire category, access to market, etc. And at that time, I ended up finding out about this announcement through a social media link that I had on my LinkedIn. So I don't know how all these other associations found out, but I certainly thank goodness that they did. So I notified as many people as I could that this was happening because we had no idea, but it was kind of an aha moment for us. We're saying, that's why all this is happening. That's why nobody's talking about anything, is because they were staging this review to happen. Okay, now we get it. So it was just a matter of putting observations together, and it was an irrefutable conclusion. It just made sense. So now we had to respond, and on April 21st, I think it was, and 22nd, the review took place at hearings held in Washington, D.C. at the FDA offices. So I decided to attend because I could see we were probably a poster boy for an issue or something, and I wanted to be able to refute with actual facts of what we knew about our products and about the process. FDA communicated with SANUM after those hearings. So in some cases, I guess we were thankful that we shook the tree a little bit, at least some communication resumed. But the communication was to indicate that, in fact, they are sorry that the guidelines may have been misunderstood, so we've rewritten them to better capture the SANUM product in this obstruction. So it was all rather frustrating at the time, I would say, and we continue to have frustration. We still try to work on strategies. Essentially, the policy is based on the fact that if you are asserted to be producing antibiotic molecules in your facility, then you can continue doing whatever you're licensed to do with those antibiotic molecules, but you can't make anything else. So once there was an assertion that there was some kind of contamination of these molecules appearing, they're using that to say, okay, well then you can't bring any of your products to the country because now we're saying you have these in there. So this is the substance of it. There are strategies involving a lot of money to try and fix it. I don't know where we're going to end up, but we're continuing to move forward. And this is largely, by the way, in the hands of the German manufacturer. Everything I'm telling you now is our experience. I'm really not speaking on their behalf, but this is what we see going on. So the 2 days of the homeopathy review was a tremendous event, I thought. I was quite impressed. It was like attending a worldwide symposium of the experts in this entire modality. So people were talking about CAM generally, but of course specifically homeopathy and how it fits into issues like considerations for safety, continued access to market. What about the consumers? Do they get easily confused over what homeopathy is? And then, of course, pediatric came up again and again. But overall, the presenters did a great job of touching on the facts. I prepared, as I mentioned, a downloadable assembly of all the FDA hearing materials. And one of those speakers was Dr. Bruce Shelton, who was there to represent AHIMA, the Arizona Homeopathic and Integrated Medicine Association. And I'm sad to say, to acknowledge his passing just a little while ago. Bruce was a very strong, brave leader in this industry, in this profession. He was a strong advocate. He was an educator of peers. and he was certainly always helping homeopathy and integrated medicine generally to move forward. He will be missed. He was a bit of a social butterfly, always had a smile on his face, so that's a sad story to have to relate here. Bruce is very well known for his work a few decades ago with colleagues in Arizona to bring the first modern resurgent and footholds of these beneficial technologies to Arizona. So, yeah, it's quite a strong legacy he leaves behind. But I did have the pleasure of hearing the AHIMA presentation, and I thought I would touch on a few things that Bruce brought to bear there at the podium. First of all, Dr. Shelton told the panel he has 25 years of practice managing over 20,000 patient visits. That's just his practice. AHIMA membership estimates they've had over 2 million patient visits in the same period, and they've never had a bad experience with safety or quality in homeopathic products. Federal regulations are clear. The homeopathy should be available for users and regulated under the Homeopathic Pharmacopoeia of the United States. And this is written into law. And many believe it was written into law many years ago because it was felt eventually it would be threatened. So it needed special protection because medicine at that time was changing. Medical practitioners must have the freedom to choose the best course of treatment suitable for their patients, especially where they see other options have failed. So this is acknowledging again the trust we have in our doctors, the most educated people we have in our community, to make decisions that are responsible on behalf of patients. No organization in the world has ever determined that homeopathy is not safe. The WHO, the World Health Organization, reports that apparently Honduras is the only country in the world that seems to have not approved homeopathy. I don't think we want to follow them as our model, but hopefully we don't go there. WHO ranks France the #1 medical system in the world. In 1997, 39% of French physicians acknowledged prescribing homeopathic products. Several French medical schools offer homeopathy degrees, and in fact, in the United States, there are currently 1, maybe 2 institutions now developing postdoctoral homeopathic degrees. This is just happening locally. And pharmacy there teaches homeopathy as a core subject as well. According to the British Medical Journal, 40% of Dutch medical practitioners apply homeopathy there. A 5-year comprehensive review by the Swiss government concluded homeopathy is effective, safe, and cost-efficient. But if you read any reports or any recommendations or narratives coming from the U.S. or Canadian regulators, they never mention that study, but they do mention all the studies that don't like homeopathy. FDA and FTC guidelines already provide sufficient authority to correct the authentic faulty product claims, faulty products and or claims related to a product condition on an incidental basis. No one's perfect. Of course, mistakes happen, and they have every authority they need to look after those when they occur. My thanks to Bruce and AHIMA for piecing together a great presentation. Here's another presentation that came from Dr. Robert C. Dumont. He's pediatric integrated medicine practitioner at Ruby Institute for Integrated Medicine Northwestern, a previous associate professor of pediatrics at Loyola University Medical Center, and also director of Pediatric Cystic Fibrosis Center, and his many other credentials that are in his presentation document. This is an important presentation for me because most of the rationale for the FDA review is framed with a concern for children. And in summary, Dr. Dumont says homeopathy is playing a growing and major role for his patients, especially as we become more experienced with the remedies and have seen the associated patient benefits. The safety and lack of adverse interactions makes it a category especially valuable as an option for children. And we're going to see as we talk here a lot more information about aspects of safety. The FDA review framework expresses concern for consumers in the marketplace who may be confused about what homeopathy is, or they misunderstand homeopathic products as a category. The consumer understanding was measured apparently using a small sample telephone poll to the confused consumers. And they asked questions about homeopathy, but it was in part of a larger consumer goods survey. And we never saw the survey. I don't know if they were asking about cornflakes or what they were, but it just seemed to us to be weak way of establishing a major pillar and a rationale for a national review. Presentations made at the hearings included industry studies that cleared up any concerns that might be there about consumer confusion. Anyone who operates a business was also impressed by the effective simplicity of the comments made by Mr. Yale Martin. Now, he's previously a manager and buying and merchandiser of OTC drugs for Walmart's 5,000 U.S. stores across the country, and he did that for 18 years. He's not a practitioner himself, but obviously he's well educated now in OTC. Now he's a private business consultant, but he felt compelled to come to this hearing to dispel this myth about consumers not knowing what they're doing. He says consumers are far more educated today than when he started 25 years ago. They use the internet to educate themselves, and they look for efficacious options for their families. So they're into self-treatment, self-help, but they're shopping. They're learning about the products, and they're making educated choices. Mr. Martin retains his high regard for the reputation and product quality delivered by the homeopathic companies. And in his experience, there's really no difference between a homeopathic company quality expectation and a standard OTC company's quality reputation. It really doesn't apply. It's just a different product. And all products have their issues with quality. They're either good or they're bad or they're mediocre, but that's the reputation of that product. Mr. Martin tells us the free market system is its own OTC regulatory mechanism. And that advice is based upon 18 years of merchandising experience. Products that don't work don't sell. Poor products simply don't attract repeat sales. And the less effective products are self-limiting, and especially where this is such a high safety category. And we'll see more about that. But the market looks after itself. Mr. Martin says the marketplace growth is providing us all, actually, with useful message now about experience value, the public's experience of value, safety, and efficacy. That's why homeopathy continues to slowly grow as patients and customers are telling each other their experiences. So slowly it starts to build. I don't think by any means homeopathy is pervasive, but everybody would acknowledge it seems to attract more interest lately. So what about safety? The word comes up over and over. As an attendee at the event, one of the most impressive presentations for me was by the American Institute of Homeopathy. The AIH also publishes the peer-reviewed American Journal of Homeopathic Medicine. Maybe you've seen that. I don't know how many practitioner members AIH represents. It doesn't say on their website, but they include a broad spectrum of licensed physicians and healthcare specialists. In particular, the AIH team of presenters was quite impressive to me. And Ronald Whitmont, Bernardo Merzaldi, David Riley, and Michelle Dossett quite impressed me. In their summaries, studies examined by AIH were cited, and they have summarily concluded that homeopathic consumers can be characterized as more compliant with their medical care. They're highly motivated. This was interesting. They're well educated at a measurably higher average than conventional treatment users. They're conscientious about their lifestyle choices. They act responsibly. They take their own healthcare decisions very seriously. Dr. Merzaldi summarized his 35 years of medical practice by saying most patients now come to him as a consequence of patient referrals or from colleagues. And this would be by the reputation of the services they're getting. Many know about homeopathy before they come, and patients want choice. Homeopathy is clinically effective and an economical option. The WHO reports in 2002 that 65% of the population, I'm not sure where that was, I'm assuming they were talking about North America, but it seems a little high to me, are embracing CAM approaches and use of homeopathy. In any event, it's showing a Western nation with a very high adoption of homeopathy. We in the industry can see the practice is not broadly pervasive, but it's certainly growing. I can see this is happening despite the corporate media title cycles that tend to generalize that homeopathy isn't effective. We see these time and time again. And you may have been a recipient, if you're on my list, of a link that I sent about 2 weeks ago to a radio show that was happening here in the Vancouver area. And I just wanted people to know these things are happening out there. I'm sure you're hearing them too. Patients in contact with AIH members insist they want continued freedom to choose homeopathic drugs as part of their healthcare options. Okay, progress. By my observations, I see practitioners apply homeopathy within the context of conventional and natural medicine as a complementary therapy. Homeopathy is not unto itself a silver bullet for everything. I don't think anyone with any clinical experience has ever said that. Like any other choice of medicament, there are situations where homeopathy offers a good option for particular circumstances. And when the tool is taken out of the toolbox, it's really only the doctor that knows it's gone. They wish they could have helped that patient because they had something they've used for years. And when it gets removed, it's very troubling. Dr. David Riley states that after reviewing 10 years of past activity, there are only 48 FDA warning letters for homeopathic products, and 60% of those were related to misbranding. None were indicated as a consequence of an incident. Michelle Dossett states that based upon decades of practical experience, AIH members can anecdotally declare that homeopathic medicines are safer than conventional medicines. Side effects tend to be mild or transient, and for limited conditions, their use may reduce the potential for adverse drug reactions and interactions. And again, the Swiss government report of 2011 has an excerpt that states essentially the use of medium and high potency homeopathics is free from toxic and unexpected organ effects. It's a nice choice in the toolbox. Dr. Dorsett presents excerpts from a 2012 German pharmacovigilance report. The study reported 303 million homeopathic ampoules sold for rejection between 2000 and 2009. Adverse drug reaction rate report was 1,180 records for that period. That's less than 4 per 1 million ampoule applications. And I'm wondering myself, were these healing reactions possibly? 71.8% of the reactions were possible side effects that are actually indicated on the product labels, but they end up in these reports. 27.3% were localized reactions. 48 reports of 303 million doses were classified as serious. Another report from the International Journal of Clinical Practice summarizes adverse effects in 17 countries from 1978 to 2010. 1,159 adverse effect reports include 1,070 that are unspecified remedies, and they largely represent precautionary calls of accidental child ingestion resulting in little or no side effects. And we did hear a presentation from the Poison Control Center as relating to homeopathy. And by far, most of the calls received by that branch around the country were connected to accidental ingestion by children, and mothers were concerned. But very rarely they said that they would usually tell the mother, well, just watch the child, and if you see something going sideways, take them down to the clinic. But very rarely was that ever actually done. So here's an interesting study. I'll just move along here. This is another study that was presented out of that report from AIH. And you can see here that of the the adverse effect reports, overall 10,311 for homeopathy. And then we look at acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and dextromethorphan here. And of those, how many of those required medical care? So someone went down to the local clinic because they weren't feeling well, or to hospital. So you can see if we're talking about safety, how does that even appear on the same map? So I just went ahead and grouped the numbers myself. If I take all homeopathy and 10,311 and put it and combine all of the OTC drugs that were on that list, what's the difference in magnitude? Well, you can see 97.6% of all the required medical care seem to be associated with the OTC drugs. 2.4% was homeopathics. And how serious were they? Probably not really very serious. They were more just concerning to the person at the time. Thank you very much to the American Institute of Homeopathy for that presentation. I was quite impressed by it. One last presentation I'll touch on. I don't want to take up all of Heather's time here. People always are saying, and this came up again and again from the expert panel members, how can a diluted substance possibly work as well as a full-strength solution? And despite all of the above presentations of esteemed doctors who've been using these methods for 20, 30, 35 years, we kept coming back to what's the evidence. I was so happy and impressed to see a very unexpected presentation by a pharmaceutical company called Materia Medica Holding. Nothing to do with us, by the way. It's a company based in Russia, and what they had done is worked on ways of making an effective antibiotic, a very popular medical standard treatment. They wanted to bring that to North America, but before they did so, their whole focus on this product development, apparently these antibody products have a tendency to be very toxic in high dose, but you need the high dose for it to be efficacious. So you're always titrating the dose to get as high as you can, at the same time not allowing too many side effects to appear. This has always been a challenge for this category. They had this idea, hey, what if we produced a homeopathic version of these antibiotics? They wondered if that would work. So they did that. They basically went through the standard high dilution and succussion methodology associated with homeopathy. And then they did standard pharmaceutical clinical testing because, of course, they can easily anticipate they may still have serious possible side effects. And the clinical testing actually showed the typical very low toxicity, but yet this low dilution with the homeopathic potentiation delivers the effectiveness. Perfect combination, low molecular concentration, but sustaining the performance of the molecule. This is the mystery that is homeopathy. There are so many explanations that are offered for this. Materia Medica had a different question for the panel. They don't even ask if homeopathy works. They know it works. That's clinical study right there. Their problem is, here we have this traditional antibody pharmaceutical that would normally be required to be registered as a pharmaceutical script product, but they're not being allowed to do so because it doesn't have enough stuff in it. They've diluted it through the homeopathic process, so they're not being allowed to register it that way. Then they walk down the hall to the homeopathy department, and the homeopathy department doesn't allow it because these antibodies are not in any monographs for pharmacopoeias around the world. It's not a classic homeopathic ingredient. So here we have a classic situation where you end up with a catch-22 situation with the regulator, where the regulator doesn't have the inherent flexibilities to make a judgment decision and allow an innovation to gain access to the marketplace to benefit the community. And this has always been my frustration, and this is the same message I took with me to Washington. Essentially, if the bar for safety and supposed concerns is too high, and we all agree we want to be safe, but if the bar is too high and every new product requires a $25 million study, then we're really just eliminating significant healthcare options for practitioners, patients, and retail consumers. So I love this presentation because it really hit the problem on the head. It established a nice, rich foundation of evidence for the products that they produced. They even had an NMR evaluation of the pre-dilution and then the after dilution, and you can see the molecular activity is still sustained by the dilution. It's amazing. So they did some serious work there. I've got a few more slides here, but I really am into, one last thing. There's always one more. When all this was popping up, Dr. Thomas Rao at Paracelsus had the occasion to take a visit from Dr. David Riley, who of course was part of the team presenting on behalf of the American Institute for Homeopathy, and he was actually inviting Thomas to attend a conference that was happening in Stuttgart. But he did mention to him another project he's working on, and that's this thing called CARE. Basically, I talked to David when he got back from that trip about what this project is about. We always talk about evidence gathering in natural medicine, and there's a significant challenge in gathering evidence in natural medicine. It's not like where you just give them the blue pill or the red pill and then measure the result. Because when you go see a natural medicine practitioner, you're getting your case picked apart like it's a puzzle. And so when you walk out an hour later, you often have a list of things you need to be changing. Your diet may change. You may have a supplement that you're on to correct a certain inefficiency in your body. You may have a toxic situation that needs to be relieved to allow regulation to proceed. So these kinds of considerations are always multiple within a complex chronic disease case, and it makes it very difficult for the gathering of evidence. David's proposition and the team he's working with is essentially that if we can standardize the taking of patient records in the United States, in Canada, around the world, and if those patient records can be defined in a structured manner, then the cumulative results of them can actually statistically start to show evidence. And I'm talking about evidence that would be adopted by peers in reviewed publications. David knows his stuff. I was quite impressed, and the people he spends his time with, certainly the ones I met in Washington, are also impressive. These people have done their homework, and I want to spread the news about this. The information is on this slide, and if you could look at your clinic and the way you handle your information, I'm sure they've designed this in a way that eases the ability to contribute to the database. And there's so many modalities that we're involved in, of course, in natural medicine, complementary alternative medicine approaches, integrated medicine, functional medicine. But as these reports start to come in, we will start to see evidence start to appear regarding effectiveness, potential harms that we're seeing or ineffective therapies, and also the costs and what a benefit that would be to not have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve that. So it looks like there's opportunity to do it together here. So congratulations to that team, and I really hope you can find the time to contact them. But certainly I'm available for any calls. I'd love to hear from the doctors about their experiences. What can you do to help? I really encourage you to talk to your patients about taking some of the amazing cases you have where you've seen a transformation or someone on a serious medical journey who you've helped guide to the brighter other side of the door, and just make a very short story of that and put them on your website. Let your association know about them. Encourage your association to gather such stories. Do the same thing. The community needs to know what we can accomplish. And this is the problem, is we are kind of our own little club. I think you already know that, but we need to do more about stepping out of our safe circle and telling people what we're actually up to. So I encourage you to do that.
Great, Terry. That was wonderful. Thank you for presenting a very thorough homeopathic landscape of 2016, both for Canada and the United States. It really allows people to get an understanding of where we're at and how much advocacy is still truly needed so that we continue to move forward. So thank you very much, Terry.
Yeah, you're welcome.